Hello and welcome to the Emerging Civil War Virtual Symposium. I'm Chris Mikowski. Thanks so much for joining us. First, want to give a big special shout out to Chris White, my co-founder, who is behind the camera today, making today possible. Chris, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing behind the scenes to bring some great content to our viewers. Since most of us are stuck at home because of the pandemic, we still wanted to be able to bring you some content. So our first speaker today comes to us from Richmond, Doug Crenshaw. He is co-author most recently of a book with Burt Dunkerley called Embattled Capital, a guide to Richmond during the Civil War. But he's here today to speak about one of his other books. He's written several, one on the Battle of Glendale, which he calls Robert E. Lee's greatest lost opportunity. And today he's here to speak about what he considers to be one of Grant's great lost opportunities, the Battle of Fort Harrison. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Doug Crenshaw.
Well, hello, everyone. It's the summer of 1864. Grant and Lee have fought the Overland Campaign, and now they're down outside of Petersburg. Grant wants no part of attacking the fortifications at Petersburg. What he's trying to do now is he's going to try to stretch Lee out or pull him out of the fortifications so he can fight him or take Petersburg itself. Grant has developed an interesting strategy, and his strategy is that he's going to send part of his army north of the James River at a place called Deep Bottom and threaten Richmond, possibly even take it. By threatening Richmond, Lee will be forced to react and will weaken his defenses at Petersburg, and Grant can break through. So the end of July, he tries this, and he sends a corps over at First Deep Bottom, called the Battle of First Deep Bottom. They attack, and it's unsuccessful. And in Petersburg they attack, and of course it's the disaster at the crater. But Grant is not deterred. He's going to try it again in August. So in the middle of August he sends another group over at Deep Bottom, and they fight the second Battle of Deep Bottom, and it's no more successful. So in September, Grant's trying to figure out what to do next, and he thinks, maybe I'll send troops down to Cape Fear. But Ben Butler has another idea. Now, Ben Butler is nobody's idea of a great general, but he comes up with an interesting plan. Butler's Army of the James is bottlenecked on Bermuda 100, which is a piece of land between the James and the Appomattox Rivers, about 10 miles from Richmond. He plans to take his army north of the James and strike quickly and take the city. He's been told by his spies, which include Elizabeth Van Lew, that there's no more than 3,000 Confederate defenders north of the river, despite the extensive works, and that a lot of the other troops they might have, ancillary troops, if you will be invalids, store clerks, government clerks, old men like myself, and these would cause no real problem for Butler's army. So he approaches Grant with his plan, and Grant goes, well, I don't have anything to lose, it might work. And at the very least, if you're going to take 20,000 men north of the river, Lee's going to have to react strongly, and it really might open his lines in Petersburg up for me to attack. So he tells Butler to go ahead with some caveats. He says, first, it has to be a quick attack. Don't take anything but what you can carry. No artillery, no wagons, no supplies. You have to strike fast. Second thing is it has to happen before the end of September. And the reason for that is that it's an election year, and they want more victories so to give Lincoln more support for the re-election. He tells Butler to go ahead and make his plan, and he does, and the plan is very detailed, and if you'd like to read it, it's in the official records. Butler has two corps. He has the 10th Corps under David Birney, and he has 18th Corps under E.O.C. Ord. He plans to cross at Deep Bottom, the same place Grant had gone before, with the 10th Corps, and to strike a place called New Market Heights. Once they take New Market Heights, the army will turn, march up New Market Road, which is modern Route 5, and head for Richmond. On the way, they plan to meet up with Ord's 18th Corps. The 18th Corps will cross at Aiken's Landing. And if you're familiar with Richmond, that's roughly where the Varina-Enon Bridge is. They'll cross, they'll march up parallel to the fortifications, the heaviest fortifications, which are at Fort Harrison. They'll attack, break through, and the troops will march behind the fortifications. If you'll notice the fortifications, they're all open back. So it's like an eggshell. Once you break through this thing, you can go behind all the fortifications with no resistance. So the idea is to break through the fortifications, march up, meet up with Birney, and march into Richmond. They'll also have to send some troops down to the river to cut the pontoon bridges where Lee would send reinforcements. Now, Butler does one really important and interesting thing. He takes the 3rd Division from the 18th Corps and gives it to the 10th Corps. So that's a third less men to attack the fortifications. And if you look at the map, you will see that the 18th Corps has a harder job of it. They have to break through the main fortifications. So why would Butler do that? Well, the 3rd Division of the 18th Corps, Charles Payne's division, is USCTs, African American troops. And most people don't think they can fight. They think they're suitable for digging ditches, being teamsters, cooks, stuff like that. Butler doesn't believe it. He thinks they have a lot at stake here and that they will fight. And he's going to prove it. He's going to have them lead his attack. They're going to cross at Deep Bottom, the same place the last 2 white-led attacks went, and they're going to succeed where the whites failed, proving they can fight. Of course, this does weaken 18th Corps, and this does have ramifications later. Now, Birney goes over the night of the 28th. There's a pontoon bridge already there. He crosses over. The morning of the 29th, they attack at New Market Heights. They win a victory at New Market Heights, and 14 USCTs win the Medal of Honor. He prepares his men to turn and go up New Market Road. The 18th Corps has 2 division commanders, George Stannard and Charles Heckman, and they're very different. George Stannard is an experienced leader. He fought at Gettysburg. His troops are the ones that swung out during Pickett's charge and fired down Armistead's lines. He was wounded there. He fought at Cold Harbor where the 18th Corps attacked, and he was wounded there. He fought at Petersburg and was wounded there. He's a very experienced commander. He knows what he's about. Charles Heckman, on the other hand, is a different animal altogether. A former seminary student, he worked for the railroad, volunteered for the war, became a brigadier general. He led a brigade, and at 2nd Drury's Bluff in the spring, or in May, he was captured, and he's just recently been exchanged. Ord's going to make a number of mistakes today. The first is this: he doesn't write down his orders. He's afraid that the Confederates will find out his orders. I don't know how he thinks that's going to happen because they're crossing the river, you know. Anyway, he thinks the Confederates will find his orders, so he just gives oral instructions, and these are going to be a real problem. He tells Stannard to get across from the fort, and when he gets across from the fort to strike it, he tells Heckman to attack on Stannard's right. The idea is for Stannard to pierce the front of the fort and Heckman to come around and flank the rear of the fort. As they march up the Varina Road, Stannard comes across from the fort. And this is what he sees. If you go to Fort Harrison today, you will think it's on flat land. But it's not. It's on a hill. It's on the highest point between Richmond and the coast. The east side, the west side, and the north side all are on a hill. The south side's an even steeper hill. This is a look from the east side, from Varina Road, a little less than a mile away. You can see the fort in the distance, and you can see part of it's been cut away. The Union troops will do that later. This picture was taken after the battle. But the fort was pretty high. It was 18 feet high from the bottom of the ditch to the top of the walls. Notice something very important. There's no obstructions in front of the fort. Normally, in front of a fortification, you'd have abattis, chevaux de frise, any kind of obstruction you could have to slow down an attacking force, and there's nothing there. Also, and it's a little hard to see, there's a ledge about halfway up. Now, normally in a fortification, you would want the slope to go straight down so your artillery could fire all the way down. But in this case, there's a ledge, and if the troops get there, they can hide under that ledge because the artillery can't go down far enough to attack it. Stannard's men come across from the fort, and they began to march in. And as they do, the Confederate fire begins. There's only 200 Confederates in the fort. They have 16 pieces of heavy artillery, but only 4 of them work. There's some troops around them, but there's not a lot. So this is a foregone conclusion that this fort's going to fall. There's 2,800 Federals under Standard alone, and there's 200 defenders. Remember, the Federals don't know that. And this is the 18th Corps. And if you'll remember, the 18th Corps fought at Cold Harbor, fortifications less imposing than this. So this is just sheer courage coming across and attacking this fort. They're going to go across the field. And as they go across, the Confederates start to fire, and they fire high. But soon they make their mark. If I might read an account, Richard Taylor was the commander in the fort. He said, "Our shells were mowing them down. Canister and grape shot from Young's company were making lanes in them. Their officers were waving their swords and cheering them on, pointing to a valley, reaching which they could be under cover from our fire." That's the ledge I mentioned. Now we were double loading with grape and canister. One of Standard's men said, "As we were advancing during the assault, a shot plunged into our column from my left. I watched the rebel gunners as they reloaded and saw them step back. A puff of smoke as the lanyard was pulled. I was exactly in line. In the center of the flame, there seemed to be a little black ball coming directly towards me. I gave a warning cry and sprang to the right, and a moment later, Reuben Wood, a recruit from Company G, directly in front of me when the gun was fired, was struck squarely in the center of his body. The shell passed through him and flew on its way. Strange to say, the shell did not knock him over backwards, but it cut a round hole in the back of his overcoat. So true and clean was the circle that apparently not a fragment of the cloth with half an inch in length was projecting into it. He fell on my left side, terribly perforated." The Federals would lose 500 men attacking this fort, but they would make it to the ledge. And when they got to the ledge, they were safe and they reformed. Then they rushed the fort. Now, think about this. Again, I told you the fort was 18 feet high. It's dry, and the fort is all dirt, and they're wearing leather shoes. They have to climb the fort. This is difficult to do. They take their rifles with bayonets in them, they stick them in the wall of the fort, and they make ladders, and they climb up over the fort. When they get to the top of the fort, a few men are hit, but they quickly swarm the fort, and the Confederates flee. They go about a mile back, and they'll create a new line called Fort Beauregard. They're under the command of Richard Ewell, who was the 2nd Corps commander. He was sent to Richmond by Lee, and now he leads the defenses. This will be one of his finest days. The Yankees get in the fort, but there's no sign of Heckman. If you look at this map, and you remember that Heckman was told to attack the Standard's right, you'll see that Heckman indeed attacks the Standard's right, but look how far to the right he goes. He attacks Battery 10 and Battery 11, and they fall. But the problem with this is, if you see the main line of fortifications, it says Camp Wall. That's the main line. He has not pierced the main line. He hasn't really accomplished anything, and he's nowhere near the fort. That's the problem with oral instructions. Once they take the fort, Ord decides he's going to send troops down to the river and cut the bridge. Now, he's lost all 3 brigade commanders. One is killed, one is wounded, and one becomes sick. He also loses regimental commanders. He has no written orders. The men are in the fort, and he makes his second mistake. He decides he's going to take the troops down to the river to cut the bridge himself. He believes in leading by example, being at the front, and he hasn't had much of a chance during the war to do either. So he and Standard are going to lead these troops to the fort. But that leaves the rest of the division in the fort not having any idea what to do. So they stay there. Ord heads down to the river. They take a few fortifications. Then he gets wounded, and he makes his third mistake. He rides off to find Grant. Instead of going back to the fort where he can direct the operations, he rides off to find Grant, who, as it happens, has just arrived at the fort. Now, Grant comes into the fort, and he's happy. New Market Heights has fallen, the fort has fallen, and troops have gone to the river to cut the bridge. He writes a couple of orders and leaves, not knowing that his greatest opportunity to take Richmond before April of 1865 is passing him by. So he leaves. Ord is gone. Another mistake he makes, he puts Heckman in charge, if you can imagine. Okay? Because Standard's experienced, but he puts Heckman in charge. And he tells Heckman to keep doing what you're doing. This is a picture of Fort Johnson. If you can see it, there's sharpened stakes out in front of it, and there's a massive ditch. And if you can make it out, there's a man in the back of the ditch to show you how deep the ditch was. Heckman attacks this with partial regiments, and he sends a brigade against Fort Gregg, which is north of this, just about in the horizon to the top. That brigade is shot down by the artillery in Fort Gregg. They stop, and his attacks here are not fruitful. Stannard is unable to take the bridge. He takes Fort Hope, which is close to the river, but he gets to Fort Maury, which is right on the river, and he is stopped. He cannot cut Lee off from sending reinforcements. So he returns to Fort Harrison. And when he gets there, instead of heading off to meet up with Ord, he starts rebuilding Fort Harrison to the rear, taking soil off the other end of the fort, putting it over there to build fortifications. Now you might wonder why he's doing that. And there's two explanations I have. One is that he doesn't know what the plan is. Probably more importantly, he knows Lee's sending reinforcements over, and that Lee is going to take this fort back if he can. He needs to stop Lee. The 18th Corps basically has shot its bolt now. The unfortunate thing about this, from Grant's perspective, is that the road to Richmond is basically wide open at this moment. There's almost nothing to stop them from taking Richmond. The only threat they have is coming from Lee coming across that bridge. Now you might wonder, well, what's Ord been doing all this time? He took New Market Heights, he turned up the road, what's he been doing? Well, Ord comes up, and he gets right about to Varina Road where he's supposed to meet the 18th Corps. And there's no sign of the 18th Corps. As far as we know, he doesn't send any messengers out. But he starts to get hit with shells from Fort Gilmer. It's about a mile away. There's a couple of heavy guns there. He starts to get hit with shells from there. So he tells Robert Foster to take his 1,500-man division and attack the fort. And he tells his brother William, who has 3 regiments of USCTs, they're to the east of the fort, to attack as well. He doesn't give them time to coordinate. He doesn't reach out to the 18th Corps. He just tells Foster to go. So Foster starts marching down towards the fort. If you ever go to Fort Harrison, you'll go down the battlefield route, and this is the route that Foster took. There's 3 swales that you'll see, and each time he goes down a swale, he's safe. But when he comes up, he's hit with fire from the Louisiana Guards artillery to his right and from Fort Gilmer to his front. He goes down the 2nd swale. He comes up, he gets hit. He goes down the 3rd swale. He comes up and he gets hit. They finally come out of the 3rd swale, and it's a very short hike to the fort from here. They rush the fort, but they're stopped. They retreat. They go back and reform. The 5th USCTs arrive from New Market Heights. They're going to try it again, so they attack again, and they're stopped cold. What about William's attack? William is not a great tactician, as you'll see. He has 3 regiments, the 7th, 8th, and 9th USCTs. And he's facing a more daunting task. In front of him is Fort Gilmer. To his left front is Fort Gregg, and there's an apron or fortifications between them. And he's supposed to pierce that. So he decides he'll send 1 regiment against this, and he'll send the 8th USCTs against it. They're stopped cold. William goes, okay, let me try that again. Didn't work last time, why won't it work this time? So he sends the 9th USCTs in, and they're stopped cold. So now he's going to repeat the same thing again. It's almost unbelievable. He sends the 7th USCTs forward, and they go forward towards the fort. Now this is a drawing I got from the Park Service. I don't know how accurate it is, but it's probably pretty close. Fort Gilmer is still in pretty good shape. You'll notice that there's 2 heavy guns, and to the far right you'll see 2 field artillery pieces. There's a big ditch in front of the fort. As the USCTs approach the fort, they're getting slammed pretty hard, but about 150 of them make it to the ditch. And they get in the ditch and they've got to figure out, what do we do now? We can't take this fort with 150 men. Do we retreat? If we retreat, we'll get massacred. Do we surrender? Well, there's been rumors flying around that the Confederates kill captured USCTs and their officers. So that could be suicidal as well. While they're thinking about it, the Confederates start taking artillery shells, cutting off the fuses, and rolling them down the hill like massive hand grenades. We know this is true. In 2014, at the 150th, The Park Service was cleaning out the ditch for visitors for the 150th, and we found one of those shells there, cut off. It hadn't exploded. So you know this happened. These guys don't have long to decide, so they decide they'll surrender. The story is that one USCT was killed and that Richard Ewell stopped it saying that, hey, they're as brave as any fighters I've seen. Let them be, take them into imprisonment. And after the war, about 50 of them actually made it home, as far as I can tell, which is probably not bad. But right now, the 18th Corps and the 10th Corps are stopped. You might wonder, well, where's Butler doing all this? This is his attack. This is the main focus of attack. Butler is back at Newmarket Heights, congratulating the USCTs that are there on their work. He tries to come over, receives some fire, and goes back. He never makes it over here. So Lee comes over. And all day long, Lee's sending reinforcements. And by that night, he has 20,000 veterans of the Army of Northern Virginia there. He decides he has to take this fort back. If you think about it a minute, it's obvious why. If the Yankees keep a fortification there, they have a strong position for which to threaten Richmond. Lee will have to leave significant reinforcements on that side of the river. Eventually, he'll leave the whole First Corps over there. This weakens him in Petersburg and gets rid of any opportunity for launching a significant offensive threat. He has to take this back. So he comes up with a plan for the next day. He has troops at Fort Johnson, and he's going to send 2 brigades down towards the fort. He also has troops under Robert Hoke, a whole division to the west. If you'll remember, I told you the west, there was a hill there, and there is. And they're down in a valley, and they can't even be seen. They're completely safe. Now, in the meantime, the Yankees have fortified Fort Harrison. They start to build the walls up. Inside the fort, they have 2 regiments with repeating rifles. They have a battery of artillery now. They have about 5,500 men from the 18th Corps, plus the 10th Corps is on its right flank. Lee's plan is to hit the fort at 2 o'clock. Anderson's men start to march down towards Fort Harrison. And the plan is for them to get about halfway down and to stop and lay down. Then Bratton's supposed to come down. Anderson's men will stand up. They'll attack the fort at 2 o'clock. And Hoke's men will come across and attack at the same time. That'll give you 5 brigades attacking the fort. Anderson's men start to march. They don't lay down. Don't know why. Possibly because they're scared. They're getting hit. They keep on going to the fort. They get repulsed and they go back. And they run right into Bratton's men who are coming down to attack. Total confusion. Bratton's men finally get their way through. They go towards the fort and they're driven back. Now, Hoke can see all of this. If you remember the picture of Fort Johnson I showed, the whole area is clear. Hoke can see all this, but he doesn't move. And you're probably wondering, why isn't Hoke attacking? The Federals can point all their fire at Bratton and Anderson. Hoke doesn't move because it's not 2 o'clock yet. So at 2 o'clock, he sends McKethan over. This is Klingman's old brigade. Sends him over the ridge and heading towards the fort. They get massacred. McKethan loses 400 men. He then sends Colquitt over. They're driven back. Lee's attack fails. That evening, John Pemberton of Vicksburg fame is talking to Lee. Pemberton is now in Richmond. He's talking to Lee and he says, "General Lee, are you going to attack again tomorrow?" And Lee looks at Pemberton and says, "General Pemberton, I attacked today with my full force. I suffered great casualties. I can't attack tomorrow." Lee lost 1,000 men in this counterattack, men he can't replace. He is now left with a situation where the Yankees will hold Fort Harrison. They will never take the rest of it until April 2nd. Now, action continues, which is outside the scope of my book, but I have some books I'll show you. Continues a little bit north of this in the fall. In November, the USCTs move into Fort Harrison, and they build a camp. In the distance, you'll see a line of trees. That's Fort Beauregard, less than a mile away of the Confederates. They have held from the river all the way to Fort Gilmer, and they've rebuilt the line at Fort Beauregard. The USCTs hold this position. On the night of April 2nd, word comes that the Confederates have abandoned the works. Very late in the night, early in the morning, the Yankees send some troops over at Fort Gilmer to find out if it's true. The Confederates have a minefield there, and they mark the mines with flags. And the idea is that you pull the flags up when you're going to get attacked so the enemy doesn't see where the mines are. Well, they've abandoned the fort, they left the flags up. The Yankee scouts crawl up Fort Gilmer and find out the Confederates are gone. Same thing happens at Fort Harrison. The Confederates are gone at Fort Beauregard. All these men advance towards Richmond. They'll come to an intersection that's still there. There's a 7-Eleven at an intersection. And you reach the 7-Eleven if you're heading towards Richmond. The USCTs and the white troops arrive at the same time. And the white troops claim precedence, take the road, and the USCTs get in the grass, and they all run towards Richmond, march as fast as they can and run. We don't know which of them made it through. There's reports either way. But these are the first troops that will make it to Richmond. Unfortunately, they could have made it through probably back in September 29th. Now, talk about the fort itself and preservation. In the 1920s, Douglas Southall Freeman and some of his friends set out to preserve some of the battlefields around Richmond. Fort Harrison is the first place they saved. You might recognize Freeman's markers around Richmond. He put 63 stone markers around all the battlefields in Richmond, and they're called Freeman markers. Fort Harrison became the first Virginia state park, and in the 1930s, it was turned over to the Park Service. And here you see a 1938 picture. I just found this very interesting. 1938 picture. It looks like people coming right out of church on Sunday in their Sunday best. Can you imagine going to a battlefield in your Sunday best? They go to the battlefield in their Sunday best, and there's your park ranger. You can see his getup. And there's this beautiful map, but no one knows what happened to it. But now Richmond has 13 sites, and I encourage you to go to Fort Harrison. It's an under-visited site. Fort Gilmer, Fort Johnson, Fort Harrison, Fort Hoke, and Fort Brady, a Union fort that was built after, are all there, and they're all in excellent condition. I would highly recommend that you go and see them. I want to talk to you about a couple of books you might be interested in. We talked about Newmarket Heights. This is a book by Jimmy Price about the battle at Newmarket Heights, about the USCTs there. Highly recommend this book. I also have a book by Hampton Newsome called Richmond Must Fall. This is about the action after Fort Harrison in the fall of 1864. Fascinating book, very well done. And then I have the Bible, if you will. It's called Richmond Redeemed. I'm not sure you can make it out. All right. Siege of Petersburg by Richard Summers. Dick Summers was a famous historian. This is actually his PhD dissertation. He was as fine a man as you ever want to meet, a true gentleman and a great historian. He wrote this book for his dissertation. It's not the easiest read, I'll caution you. But the information is fantastic. The footnotes are fantastic. And if you really enjoy it and you really want to research this topic, at the Richmond Battlefield Park Library, we have his dissertation in 5 volumes. The footnotes alone are worth traveling to Richmond to see. This is a great book. I highly recommend it. And with that, I thank you.